All right, guys, let's dive into our first topic, which is a little bit interesting because we had the show notes drafted last night and we were all hot and heavy to talk about ChatGPT-4o. We now need to sort of talk about it in the context of Google I/O's new announcements. So we'll see how this goes. Let's talk about 4o first, and we'll do that a little bit in isolation. And then let's talk about Google's I/O and its response almost, even though it's only 24 hours. So a little bit of context, a little bit of history here. Obviously, OpenAI has been releasing model after model, and Sam's told us, and we've covered this idea that, hey, maybe they'll be releasing these models a little bit differently, a little bit more incrementally. He said there's something big is going to come before GPT-5, and true to his word, they've just announced 4o. Some of the big new demonstrated features are A, the voice interface is way slicker, way. I would say almost this thing is mostly about voice and mostly about multimodal. You can interrupt it while it's talking. There is video, live video, almost kind of doing what Google demonstrated that they wanted to do in that fake demo where it's live stream and it's interrogating what's happening on the screen. It's super fast and responds almost like conversationally. It has incredible emotion and even voice manipulation. You can ask it to talk more dramatically or more robotically. It literally sounds like Samantha from Her. I mean, it's crazy. It's laughing, it's giggling, it's flirting with you. It's creepy and weird and awesome. It has long-lived actions like, hey, act like a translator for me, and it'll kind of translate back and forth. It can sing. It has a desktop client. Now, importantly, the reasoning is similar to GPT-4. It's not any smarter, technically speaking, at reasoning. And importantly, also, it's free. They're giving it to all their free users. So this is the kind of the quick recap of what they announced. It's a lot. It's a lot. What do we all make of this? Elli, maybe you want to go first.
I thought it was so funny, just kind of one of the first things that you brought up was that you can interrupt it. I thought that was hilarious, actually. It's such a cultural thing that you can say, hey, wait. That's not what I want you to do. But I think it is actually really indicative of the way that they're thinking about this. To me, this release is almost entirely focused on interface and interaction design. They're really not focused on the intelligence of the model. They weren't talking about hallucinations or reducing hallucinations or making sure that it gets the right answers. They're not even talking about, the model continuing to build on additional data or learning or the intelligence behind the platform. They're really focused on interaction design. And I think that's pretty indicative of what we've heard Sam talking about quite a bit. As you said, he's also very focused on reasoning. And this is something that they recognize is still a horizon that they have to tackle. But this to me was a shift in the way that this release occurred in their focus and their attention to vision, voice as a key interaction method, as you pointed out, and how they're thinking about this as a product experience as opposed to a model.
I think you nailed it. First of all, before we get into all the awesome stuff, 4o, what is it with these companies? They reach a certain scale and they're like, let's just get really bad at naming things. This is like,
right.
They're following the Google model of giving things bad names. Apparently the O stands for Omni, which doesn't help at all.
Yeah, it's actually a catastrophically bad name. It should be like 4S, 4 plus, 4 something, but 4o is so bad.
I mean, I think you can look at the Google changing from Bard to Gemini, all of these names. Yeah. I think it's something that we've seen, and they definitely need to bring in a branding expert on this one, on naming.
Yeah.
Insane. But anyway, Elli, I completely agree with you that the thing that stood out for me wasn't the multimodal stuff. I mean, that's cool. But like you said, it's the interface thing. Speed, right? We've had voice interfaces before. We've had chat interfaces since ChatGPT. One of the things that's always gotten in the way of feeling like you are talking to another person is that latency, right? There's a delay in starting the response, and then there's a slow delivery of the response. And what they seem to have done with this is eliminate both those issues, right? So forget about the voice stuff, just with the chat interface. It's so much faster. That's one of the things I actually liked about Gemini, is it was faster than the old ChatGPT. That makes a huge difference. Interruptions, even in text, makes a huge difference, because what used to be annoying is it would take 20 seconds to put out an answer, and like you're 3 seconds in, you know it's not what you're looking for. You're like, no. Okay. So it makes it a lot more naturalistic. And then that unlocks the voice interface, because then you can actually have a conversation. Like until then, you could say that you were having a conversation, but like if you've got a 20-second pause before you get a response, you're not really having a conversation. The latency is too high. The lag is too high. So they've eliminated that. That's the big thing for me. The flirty voices, I'm less impressed than you, Chris. I'm certainly freaked out. It's gross. But I'm like, okay, yeah, I mean, it just sounds like it's trying too hard, and you can still tell it's a robot.
I think it's funny that you guys both had such a reaction to this voice. Obviously, I think what they were trying to show is that they actually are trying to imbue emotion into this model's verbal response now, which to me, I think was effective. And I assume that they're going to get to a place where obviously you're able to customize and select the different voice methods that it doesn't have to be a Samantha from her if you don't want it to. But I think I was pretty impressed with the range of the voice. It's funny that you guys both had such a reaction to the flirtiness. I was like, oh, bubbly and playful.
Well, maybe, I think it really was the Samantha from her thing.
It sounds like Scarlett Johansson.
Maybe it's a gender thing.
Yeah.
It felt like it was trying to manipulate our emotions.
Yeah, no, it's definitely yeah. It has a Scarlett Johansson voice, which I'm wondering why she hasn't sued them yet, and it has like a McDreamy voice from Grey's Anatomy, which the Figure One demo uses. And it has like, two very popular actors in Hollywood and whose voices are, very much admired, let's call it. Yeah, I think you guys nailed it absolutely, that this is about UX, and the UX piece is about speed and multimodal. I think there's a real lesson here. I think it's actually about product, business model, and partnerships. And it's a lesson for founders, I think, and operators. So you can see how Sam and the team are thinking about this not as a pure technology problem, not as a go deeper and deeper and deeper on research and reasoning only. It's about recognizing that ChatGPT was a UX revelation, right? Because GPT had been there for a long time. It's when they turned it into ChatGPT that they had their ChatGPT moment. And that was a UX revelation. And now they're kind of adding a voice and video revelation, a UX change. And I think it will change the way people interact with it. It'll change the way it feels. And that is a product change, obviously powered by deep tech, but it is a focus on UX. There's also a business model aspect to this, which is that it's free. And they're setting the economic value of this level of reasoning, this level of emotionality, this level of multimodality. And they're taking all the oxygen out of the room for all these other startups and even potentially for a Google or an Apple. And this is non-trivial and not accidental. The way they characterize it is, OpenAI for us, the open part means that everybody should have access to it. And it's about, democratization of access to AI. It's also about setting the value to zero, taking the oxygen out of the room, and then later taxing the world when they become one of the primary intelligence layers of the universe. And then the other observation I made is there's a bit of interesting partnership dynamic here because Microsoft's given them like $10 billion, except all the devices on stage were Macs. And the first desktop client is Mac. And it says the Windows client coming later this year. And I just think that is an interesting thing, given who their partner is right now. And it's an interesting thing, given the rumors that we were going to cover on today's show as well, which is that Apple is flirting with the idea of adding ChatGPT to iPhone.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, certainly those types of decisions are no mistake when you pull out a MacBook onto the table and that's the one that you're working with, and that all of the Apple products that they were obviously demoing through. I have been wondering, obviously, this announcement would have, if that's not the case, it would greatly usurp the forthcoming Siri overhaul that we know we're going to be seeing at, June 10th Apple Developer Conference. And I think that it is potentially an indication of what's to come, hopefully, maybe. I think that there's a really interesting precedent for it. Obviously, Apple, we know, has partnered with and licensed with, call it, frenemies in the past with licensing Google and ensuring that Google search is the default search engine on every iOS device and every Apple device when you go and open up a new tab and search for something. We have seen these types of really broad reaching and super effective licensing partnerships in the past. So we know that Apple's willing to do that. It is a pretty interesting question of whether or not both parties are going to come to the table. It would definitely position them combining the hardware expertise that Apple has with really the new software paradigm of AI that OpenAI has created and could be a juggernaut.
I nearly see that this whole AI thing, it's becoming very Game of Thrones, right? So it was like, Microsoft were making these moves. There was the board thing. There was the hiring all those people from, I can't even remember the name of the AI company, sort of the acquisition that wasn't an acquisition from Microsoft. And Apple are in an interesting role in this Game of Thrones, I think, which is they have the ability maybe to be a bit of a kingmaker, right? I think in their actual AI tech, never count Apple out, but they seem to be not in the same level as OpenAI or Google or Facebook or Anthropic or all of those guys. But they have that distribution power, right? And I think there were rumors not that long ago that we covered in this podcast too about Apple getting into bed with Google. So it nearly feels like it might be in their interest to be playing these other folks off against each other to maximize their leverage here. If there are rumors of like Apple with Google, then Apple with ChatGPT, and goodness knows what. Google already pays Apple tens of billions of dollars each year for their search distribution partnership. And so that's a weird thing. Apple will be taking the tech from someone, but because of their brand and because of their distribution, everyone's going to be begging Apple to use their tech and will be paying Apple to use their tech.
It's not only the distribution, though. I think the other thing to consider is that Apple is sitting on troves of individual user data. Obviously, Apple is extremely committed to privacy. That's why they've said that Siri hasn't gotten better. We can argue in a different conversation about whether that's actually why Siri hasn't gotten better. But they are sitting on these users who have now been within the Apple ecosystem for decades of their lives and have decades of personal user data within an iCloud account sitting there ready to create personalized GPTs. And whether you're calling it an agent, obviously, we know that Sam Altman doesn't prefer that term. He calls it a senior employee or an operator or whatever it is. If you consider what that might look like for actualizing the potential for that personalized operator or senior employee that OpenAI wants to create, Apple is sitting on the personalized user data for each of its customers who are embedded in the Apple ecosystem. So it's not just the distribution. I think it's also the power of what their models can do combined with the personalized data for each user.
It's interesting. In some ways, Apple is very dogmatic about kind of the Apple way, their level of focus, the connector they use on the phone, whatever. But in some ways, Tim Cook is actually very pragmatic and will partner with a Google or a Microsoft or what have you and use their leverage and use their power. And so I think you're both right. Apple is in an interesting position to be a kingmaker here, to have them play off each other, to use the best tech and to have their own tech and putting this all together. So I think, OpenAI moved, Google moved twice or three times, and we're about to talk about Google I/O now. And then Apple's coming right up. So we'll see what happens.
Just before we get to Google I/O, there was just one other thing I wanted to respond to and actually ask a question. So you mentioned, Chris, that they've made ChatGPT-4o free. That is really interesting. And it's interesting because when they kind of launched ChatGPT-3 and then ChatGPT-4, and they put the $20 subscription on like the premium layer, they set the market terms, right? And everyone followed them. And now it sounds like they're changing them. And I'm actually not sure what happens to the people who are paying the $20 a month, which I am. Is that tier going away? What are the benefits of that?
I think there are a few extra features that you still get, perhaps access to the GPT store and other bits and pieces like that. But I do think they've cratered the value of that tier right now. And I think they kind of don't care. What probably fits into that tier next is GPT-5. That's probably what goes there next.
But I mean, I think it's the interesting question, right? Which is they are setting the terms of how you compete in this market. And if you're right, Chris, that, when you say taking the oxygen out of the room, what that normally means is we've got heaps of money and we're willing to run this at a loss for a long time to grow our market presence. And like all the big players have deep pockets. So I imagine that if ChatGPT is no longer interested in bringing in direct subscription revenue from this thing, Google will also make its top Gemini models available for free and so on. So it will be interesting to see because like if the best ChatGPT model is available for free, I'll probably cancel my subscription. Like I don't need the other stuff. I was just doing it to get ChatGPT-4.
Absolutely. I think you're going to see a lot of people canceling the subscription. And like you said, Chris, they obviously don't care. I think that Sam has talked about, perhaps it was Mira in the announcement of what the premium features would be. It's clear that they're focused on moving the premium features to like super users and then also potentially to enterprise. I assume it's going to be focused around monetizing the API and monetizing their GPT store, the way that developers are able to build on it. And they're going to be focused on, I suppose, other pathways to monetization. Sam has been very, very focused in recent time on how to get GPT-4 available to everyone. As you said, Chris, whether or not that's a truly altruistic position or just setting the market and saying, hey, we're going to set the terms here. I think that's yet to be seen. But there is going to be a beneficial upside to the fact that GPT-4 level intelligence will be available to everyone. And we will absolutely see a cratering of that premium tier because there's no point in people paying for it right now based on the value add that they've said is there.
Let's talk a little bit about the interview with Sam because it adds a lot of color to what we've been talking about. He really said, this is not about models. This is about product. It's about a system. It's about building a comprehensive agent or senior employee that people trust, live with, and is a kind of constellation, which is my word, of features, capabilities, distribution, and so on. And so, this is when he was being asked about open source and about this kind of competitive dynamic between the models. And, this was in the All In podcast a couple of days before 4o. And I think 4o demonstrates what he's saying. He's showing this is a better product. Forget Llama 3, forget Claude, Opus, forget all that stuff. This is a better product.